Hello everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Arthur Doler, senior software engineer at Aviture. Thank you for joining us today, Arthur.
I'm glad to be
So I
here.
know you. I know you. Well, you're a software engineer, of course, and you've been a developer for a long time. But I know you also do other work involving psychology and workplace health, mental health, and a lot of interesting topics. So, first of all, thank you because that's really an underserved and under examined field, in my opinion. In software engineering, we all work 80 hours a week. We're all constantly dealing with super hard problems and problems where millions of dollars are at stake in many cases, right? You have a deal writing on it, maybe it's two mil if you get the button to work correctly or not.
hmm
So it can be very complicated. So, would you like to tell us something more about that?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, I'm a software engineer. I'm not a psychologist or therapist or anything, but the thing I love most is digging into research about psychology, figuring out what we've learned about how the brain works, and taking that and applying it to our jobs to try and be better. Like it's just the same way as if you're working with this particular framework. If you try and push against what the how the framework was designed, you're in for a bad time, right? And so if we can figure out, okay, well, these ways of working and these patterns mesh better with how our brains tend to work, and building a deeper understanding, make workplaces that are better for us to work in. And the better our workplaces are, the better it is to work and the better work we'll do.
Mm,
So
yeah,
burnout, as you mentioned, has been a thing that's rapidly increased in
yeah, feels
desire
like
for
it.
people to talk about it. Yeah, like well, we had a global pandemic for a couple of years, and there's the key thing to start understanding about burnout is that it's a first off, it's not a diagnosis, right? It's not like a mental health diagnosis. It's not something a psychiatrist can go, hey, you have burnout. Like, I mean, they might say that, but it's not like it's not in what they call the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, edition 5, and it is instead what they call a syndrome.
Oh,
And a syndrome is a set of collected signs and symptoms that tend to occur together. So another example of a syndrome actually is imposter syndrome. You've probably heard that one too.
oh
And
yeah.
so it's not quite the level of a diagnosis.
Well, yeah. So, what are this? So what's the definition of burnout before? So we know it's not quite a diagnosis, but what happens? First of all, what's the definition, and then maybe how do you tell you're heading towards burnout? Because we all think, I feel like many other things, we feel a lot of people feel they have burnout, but they don't, while many others don't know they are in full burnout. And I think it shares some traits with that, with depression. A lot of
Mhm.
people self-diagnose depressed people. That's usually wrong. While a lot of people who don't struggle with depression think about anything but seeing a doctor about it.
Well, let's start with um, kind of what you were talking about with depression. Let's start with the baseline that feeling sad, feeling anxious, and feeling tired are natural parts of the human condition, right? And sometimes, like if I feel anxious sometimes, or you feel tired sometimes, or you feel sad sometimes, like those are normal.
Yeah.
Um, and the problem is we don't have a great word to distinguish depression, as in I am sad now, from clinical depression, which is I am sad all the time and it dramatically affects my life. Uh, that's a language problem, and that's a different discussion. But it's important to get that baseline down. That like the experiences you have can be things that are transitory, can be things that are momentary, and that's okay. um, it's a question of when these things start becoming long term, become larger, become things that dramatically start impacting what you do in a day. That's when things start getting dire. So, unfortunately, though, there is no clear, like, single definition of burnout, which is great, because there are a bunch of different categories and metrics and markers and a bunch of different people studying it. I mean, some people don't even necessarily think that it exists. They think it's
Oh,
simply Not that it's like the experience doesn't exist, but they think that burnout as a single classification doesn't exist, that it is in fact a symptom of other things.
Hmm.
But what's important about it is that really the experience is actually kind of individual. There are large similarities to it, but it's not like getting the flu. There's not like a set of, oh, I had, you've achy joints and body pain and sniffles. Congratulations, you got the flu, right? Like it doesn't work like that, right? We can't go down and take a
Yeah.
rapid test for burnout, or for anything mental for that matter. And the problems you run into with that is that it you do run into that confusion of, do I have burnout? Am I overthinking this? Am I not? Or, plowing ahead and minimizing your experience and going, oh, I'm fine. I just have to make it past this release and everything will get better. And it never does. And you're just telling yourself a story, right? Uh, but let's break it down. So the key thing about burnout is that it's a stress management problem.
I see.
And what causes, with huge air quotes around it, burnout is stress, unmanaged stress. And that stress can come from anywhere. And that's also important to talk about because we have this association of burnout with work.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
that's generally all you hear about. Like it's always about burnout is always referred to as a condition that occurs from too much work.
right, but it can come from anywhere, stress from anywhere. Um, One of the ones that I've heard talked about a lot is caregiver burnout, where you're the sole caregiver for somebody that needs care, whether that's a dependent child or a parent, and that constant need, that constant drain on you, that additional stress in your life can lead to burnout.
Yeah,
And
makes sense.
so there are a whole bunch of different categorizations and classifications for burnout. Like there's the 5 stages and the 12 stages and the 7 stages. And it depends on which psychologist you look at. But largely, what you start seeing is a progression. And it starts with kind of a initial moment. There's a psychologist called Herbert Freudenberger, who was the one who actually popularized the term in the first place. His paper in 1974 on staff burnout was about doctors and nurses in the medical profession. So burnout started as an analysis of the medical profession, and largely it has been, and a lot of the papers and analysis about it have been in professions that service humans, which is
Mhm.
actually kind of interesting because it'll be about doctors, teachers, social workers, et cetera, people who are working on a regular basis, especially in fields like those that have an emotional component to them,
Mhm.
where it's not just about getting the work done, but it's about if you fail, someone is hurt or you're not, someone, especially if you're like a teacher, right? You could, I'm going to use this word, but I don't mean it as harsh as it sounds, but you could
Mhm.
sabotage, a child's entire future career if you
Oh
screw up
wow.
and don't, there's a lot riding on some of that if you sit down and think about it in a particular way. And that stress can compound. And
Yeah.
so it leads to a question of what is it that is where's the stress coming from? And as that stress starts to progress, you start emotionally checking out. Um,
Mhm.
but the first stages are really almost a doubling down on work.
Oh really?
Of
So you react to the body reacts by trying to get things done, probably.
Well, yeah, I mean, humans love control, right? We love
Mhm.
feeling like we have control. And when we start feeling like there's a situation where we're losing control, our initial response is to start going, I can handle it. And we just go try and do everything at once, right? Which really makes the problem worse largely. But Herbert Freudenberger talks about a compulsion to prove. Like you typically start out
Mm.
at a new job, right, with a desire to kind of show them, especially if you got like a pay bump, right?
Mhm.
That you want to show them I'm worth it. I want to show them that I'm worth the pay salary that I'm getting. And the moment that that flips over from a desire to prove to a compulsion to prove, when you start finding yourself going, well, I have to do this. I need to do this. And you start dismissing your human needs, start, pushing away the past and the future. Like,
Mhm.
oh, hey, I'm not going to have time to spend time with my kids because I've got to focus on this thing right now.
Yeah. You
Those are
know,
kind of you go ahead.
now that you describe it, I know a couple people I need to go talk to.
Well, these
It's
are the
really,
very early stages, right? Where it's like you start seeing that moment of that you're throwing yourself into that to attempt to regain control. And in some cases, that can be okay. Like, it's a question of if that stress is going to be permanent or temporary, right?
yeah,
If
maybe
you're
maybe you're getting done the few things that are overwhelming you. Like is I come from consulting, so I do a lot of I used to do I have a juggle a lot of work and a lot of different contracts. Doing very different things every day. And sometimes you need, if you get something done, it will improve the situation. So maybe that's an
exactly.
attempt to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, just like if I can finish this thing, then the stress will recede, right? This one thing is the cause of my stress. So if I can, I'm good. But if what's going to happen is that something else is going to be on fire immediately after that. If you're constantly in that state of having to deal with those battles, that's the problem. That's the point when you can start marching down that road to burnout. And
Hmm.
from that point, you start engaging, like you start dealing with depression, you start dealing with anxiety, you start dealing with fatigue, getting sick a lot because stress floods your body with cortisol, and cortisol works to one of the my understanding of it is that cortisol is to basically shut down most of your body's systems that aren't needed for immediate fight or flight, like dealing with the stress. And one of those is your immune system.
Oh, wow.
Um, so cortisol, I mean, we're learning a lot about cortisol and what it does to you long term,
Hmm.
but if you're constantly in that like stressed anxiety, that stressed imposition, your body goes, well, we need to sort of save all of this energy for running away from the tiger, and we're not going to
Hmm.
bother with trying to fight off these things, because we can get to that later, right? Except there is no later. There is, what the system is built for these kind of temporary spikes of anxiety, and the long protracted slog of stress is not what it's designed for.
So
So you
effectively what's happening there is you're sort of triggering your fight or flight instincts constantly.
Yeah. Well, and you see that happen with as you start moving down the stages, you start treating other people like they're less than human because you're just so focused on finishing the thing in front of you. And it turns into a like, why can't you just do this the way that I want you to? And then it would all be done already. Your thinking becomes rigid and inflexible, which is the kind of thing you see when you're in that fight or flight, that fight, flight, freeze response. That's sympathetic nervous system. It's that moment of like, I can't, what they call functional fixedness, right? Have you ever had well, I don't know if you've ever been on a game show, but I'm sure you've had friends or, family watch like Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune and go, this is so easy. I could do this. Why am I not
Oh
on that
yeah,
show?
me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But
it's
then you get,
easier. It's easier. The common comment is it's easier at home, right? You feel the then you
yes,
think about it. It's probably easier for me because I'm sitting here. I have a cool Coke can in my hand, and I'm talking to my family, and it's so easy for me. This guy is trying to win
right.
$1 million on knowing how many fingers this famous artist had on his left foot.
Exactly. And that really is suddenly you've got an additional amount of stress, right? And that it like zeroes in your brain. Just the aperture of what you're capable of thinking of just goes and shrinks. So it leads to that inability to think outside of the immediate box that you like you latch on to an initial answer, right? And it's really hard to pivot away from that. And then the last stages of burnout are really the dire ones of just complete emptiness and uh, utter depression and extreme physical symptoms, etc. So it gets pretty dire, but the thing that you need to quite realize is that it is because it's a stress problem, your circumstances affect it. So if you have a partner that can manage things at home, like children, if you have certain levels of privilege that allow you to outsource things like cleaning your house or getting food, those things will help you manage that stress. And so what you kind of see is people will find their own sort of level of burnout. They don't always go all the way down the scale once they start sliding. They find this point and they just kind of hang there because their external circumstances help them manage that external stress.
Well, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I know people who I think are in the constant in between state. You're right.
And that's still burnout. That's the thing that's important to realize. It is still a thing that is affecting you. Even if you don't hit like the full on end of it, it's still burnout.
And again, it feels like it shares some traits of depression. Like not everybody progresses to
Yeah.
full blown major episodes. In fact, majority of people don't. Exist in a mildly uncomfortable way at some point, and then
Yeah.
they. Uh, so I know someone who has started taking medication for depression, and the first thing they said to me is, "Wow, so that's how the brain really works."
Yeah.
They
Oh, this
didn't
is how everybody
realize.
else feels. Yeah.
They didn't realize that it was not normal to be like that. It's same thing I get from people with ADHD. Like they start taking the right medication at the right dose, and suddenly they go, "Wow, so this is what's being normal."
Yeah. I
It
can speak with authority on both of those that yes, that's true.
is it's a very interesting topic. So burnout? So those are major
Yeah.
and those are major diseases, and while burnout is not to be discounted because if nothing else, burnout will impact your ability to work and thus immediately give you problems, right? If someone gets really burned out, they're at risk of getting fired. They get
Yeah.
demoted. They don't get given interesting tasks. And so the others can be life threatening. Burnout maybe not, but still, if you're out of a job, it's still not great.
Yeah.
So what's the recipe for? Is there a way to first of all, well, as you said, telling you're in burnout is very nuanced, but there are a few key telling points. Although this may be not enough, and I'm glad you have you here because just saying these things made me think of a couple people again, and it made me aware of things I might be doing too. So it's very maybe just knowing what the symptoms are will help.
Hmm.
But how do you recover from burnout once you think you're? First of all, I think I'm in burnout. What do I do?
Yeah. Well, the first step is to identify where it's coming from. Where is that stress coming from? Because it even, it could be coming from outside of your job. Because our association of burnout with our work means that the gut response is, "Oh, I'm gonna go find a new job." But there's a bunch of different reasons that that could be happening, right? If you're a woman in tech or a person of color in tech, that we talked about that compulsion to prove. Oftentimes, you kind of start already there because you feel
Yeah.
like you've got something to prove. You feel like you have to be better than your colleagues just to fit in, and so you're already like starting in a negative in that job, and that can lead to burnout at job after job after job. It can also, like we've talked about glancingly around this thing about mental health, like if you're starting with mental health problems, that can set you up for not dealing with stress as well easily.
Oh yeah, for sure.
um it can also happen, just who you are, what's your internal wiring. If you're a person that is more optimistic, you're generally less susceptible to burnout in general because you think and it'll be better tomorrow, and you actually believe that, which I wish that were true for me.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
uh if you're a person that has really well, if you have really high self-esteem, you can be really susceptible to burnout because you feel like you
Oh
have to keep up
really?
with your own story in that regard. You have to be putting out the output to match that. But low self-esteem can also lead to the same thing. Again, that you start with that, I feel like I have to prove myself constantly. So you kind of want to be middle of the road on that point. But there are all those external things. So finding a new job might not be the first thing to start with. If you looking at those and saying that sounds like me, or you've noticed that you're getting burnout job after job after job, you might turn around and go, okay, the problem is coming from inside the house, so to speak, right? Um,
Yeah, and I feel like you're hitting a very good point, especially in technology. I know many developers who jump companies every couple years, and every time they have the same reasons for doing so. It's always boring work. I'm given too many tasks and I don't get recognition for them. And I'm not doing anything interesting and I want to do something more interesting. And they always say the same things, but they're on their fifth company right now. And they're very talented people. So they get hired.
Hmm.
But it's yeah, that might be a pattern that's prevalent in our community too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a question in that regard of and trying to analyze the stress and saying, hey, where is this coming from? Where is the stress manifesting from? Is it external or is it internal?
And once you've determined the stress comes from, say, if it's internal, you can probably do you. But yeah, let's do the two cases. Like, what happens if you determine it's not them, it's me?
Right. Well, if it's internal, then it's a question of um, doing things like building a work-life balance, which I always say is, oh, sure, that's easy, right? Like, um, but trying to establish a boundary between you and your job. So I don't know about you. When did you learn to code?
I was like 9 or 10 on the
Okay.
Commodore 64.
Yeah, I was on an Apple IIe, right? It was a that's pretty common for a lot of males in software. Is we learn to code at a young age and we like coding.
Yeah.
And we often have an identity of ourselves as developers, as programmers. What that means is there's no boundary between our work and our identity. And that
Oh,
means it's like a pressure system. It's like a piping system where you don't have a backflow, right? If there's enough pressure at work, it backflows into us, into our life, and there's no way to stop it.
you're always thinking about the hard problem you have in your code, about how do we solve that weird networking question that the customer has. You're right. It's not doesn't stop.
Right. And so you have to build a an identity of yourself as a person, who has other hobbies, other interests. Who are you outside of your job? And that can help you establish a beachhead and say, no, when I leave work, it stops. Now, our job, software is way more creative than most people give it credit for, right? And there's always that element in creative work of, you're in the shower and it's like, oh, that's how I solve that problem because your brain gets bored in the shower and comes up with solutions to stuff. Um, but there's you're never going to turn that 100% away, but you can minimize it and go, okay, great, we'll write that down and put that down for now. But things like turning off Slack, etc. As long as you don't, if you can avoid feeling like you have to solve the thing, like your entire identity depends on you being the one who is able to solve this. That can create a boundary, a barrier between your job and yourself, and that can really help with some of the stress from work because now you have a space that is, well, full of other stresses, to be fair, but at
Mhm.
least it's not your work stress constantly.
Yeah, I think it's
Um,
uh, it's very peculiar to our line of work because if you are someone who's doing some still technical work, but it's physical or it is something that requires being in a specific place, like a laboratory, or you need specific equipment, you are forced to detach by virtue of the fact that, for example, if you're a biologist and you work in a lab and you work on
mhm.
vaccines or whatever, at some point they don't let you take the lethal pathogens home to keep experimenting. So there's
Yeah,
at 6 p.m. you have to leave, and then when you are outside of there, maybe you're reading articles, you're still studying, you do things, but you're forced to not do your job.
right.
Well, we can sit down and work for just a half an hour. Well, I'm bored, so I'll just go fix that one thing. And that quickly snowballs into 2 a.m. and you don't know where you are.
Yeah. It's very similar to creative work, like, being an artist, etcetera, in the sense that you can sketch anywhere. You can be gathering inspiration from anywhere. And it can be a lot really, it's funny to go talk to UX folks and talk about how they have to build a boundary between their work and their job. Because it's those moments of inspiration can strike wherever, and those moments of sitting down and just like sketching out what the UI should look like or what the flow should be on paper is totally doable. But so let's move on to the other piece of that puzzle, which is the job, right? Because this is an important piece. There we talk about burnout, and I think you even mentioned it earlier. It's about overwork, and it's not. It's not about the amount of work you're doing. That can be one of the factors, right? Is you simply have too much work to do. You have more work than you have capacity for. But it can also come from a mismatch in control.
Hmm.
If you're being tasked with things that you have no control over, you have to accomplish this thing. You're responsible for it, but you have no authority. Or you're responsible for it, but you have no ability to control or the outcomes of the situation. That can lead to burnout.
Well, yeah, I can see that happening definitely. You think that also applies to people who are tasked with doing things they don't fully know how to solve, like putting a junior developer on their own project too early, that kind, or is it a different type of stress there?
I think that's slightly different. I think that is more, I think it can. I mean, obviously, that's going to generate some stress, right? And if you're doing that repeatedly, then yeah, I think that could cause it. But typically, what like descriptions I'm having are more people like if you're being tasked with accomplishing a goal and you're not allowed to implement the framework that you need to do it, or you're unable to make the changes you need because of political reasons. There's like the problem is actually in this sub team over here and the way that they're doing a thing, and it's causing change, problems in your particular unit, and you're being, requested and required to deal with these things, but you're not allowed to fix the upstream problem. That can lead to burnout. It's moments of that, almost those moments of despair is what I've kind of described this as, of like where you look at it and go, well, I can't fix the problem. And kind of like you were saying earlier, like or like I was saying earlier, we pride ourselves on being able to fix the problem, right? And when we're
Yeah, we do.
unable to address the situation, yeah,
Things go south very quickly.
yep. But it can also be
It is
a mismatch in rewards or resources, right?
hmm.
If you're not given as a team enough resources to deal with the things that you're expected to do, or you see other people being rewarded for things you're not being rewarded for, or worse, you're getting tiny little dribbles of rewards.
Yeah, that's I feel like that's hard to balance. I mean, I ran a team at one point and never really being in charge of a large team, and I feel like that can happen because I see that happening everywhere.
Yeah.
There's a mismatch,
Well, I
or
mean,
maybe just a perceived mismatch of rewards.
that is a good point, actually. It doesn't even have to be real. It can just be perceived,
You might
right?
even
If
be
you
putting
think,
yourself in that position with the start of burnout. Like you feel like you're doing a lot more than others. That's the start of your burnout feeling. And so by virtue of
yep,
that, since you think you're doing double the work, you don't see why you're getting double the rewards. Why are you doing the same thing with the others? And you're getting, maybe you're even getting more than them. So
yep.
it's self-propagating to a degree.
One of my personal triggers or personal signs that I'm experiencing burnout is the feeling that I'm the only one on this project who cares. When
Yeah.
I start feeling that now, I understand I'm headed to burnout. Like we're already down the road.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because that's probably, I mean, that can be true in some small team situation or whatever, but in most cases it isn't, right? Most people are just doing
Yeah.
their thing. You're right.
Even if it is true, I'm still in a situation where I'm likely headed to burnout, right?
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. It doesn't, I mean, yeah, the fact that it's true or not doesn't affect the outcome, right? It's
yeah. So in those situations, finding a new job is potentially a valid thing you could go for. And in those cases, you want to find someone that, oh, this is another cause that I didn't mention, where the work that you value is not the work that the company values. So if
mhm.
you're a person that really cares about, say, doing full on CI/CD and automatic deployments and incremental work, deployed to prod, et cetera, but your company is super conservative in that regard, and they really want to make sure everything is perfect before they release it, and they only want the users to see that tiny bit of like the new incremental stuff periodically. They don't value the work you're doing, and it isn't that either one is necessarily right or wrong. It's more there's a mismatch of values there, and that can lead to burnout because you feel like the work that you care about, you're not being given a chance to do that work.
Yeah. And yeah, you always, so I feels like you have to be aware of whether if what you're thinking is true, which is, I guess, hard to find out. Like, are you
Yeah.
Is it that, so if you care for different things, that might be a good moment to consider your job for sure. It's like, are you
Yes.
are you in the right position? If you completely don't match, I've always been in consulting, so I don't really have much experience with being an employee. But I've had customers where we ended up parting ways because they couldn't work with our method or we couldn't work with theirs. So if that was, and that's easier because those are the customers, aside from, you find another for a
Mhm.
job. I feel like it can be harder because, well, especially right now, it's not exactly the right moment to switch jobs right now.
Yeah.
But still, it is always a valid thing.
Then the
So
last thing, there's one last thing for
yeah.
handling burnout. So if you can't necessarily work to establish that work-life balance and be transactional about the job, et cetera, and if you can't find a new job for whatever reason, because sometimes people can't, one of the things you can do, and this sounds a little, if you think of burnout as an overwork problem, this sounds a little perverse, but it's not.
Mhm.
You can go volunteer, go find some meaningful work, something
Hmm.
that is going to move the needle for you. Whether that's open source, we have the ability to do that in software,
Oh yeah.
or whether it's even something like Habitat for Humanity, where you're just going to go out and swing a hammer for a weekend. Because you don't want to
No.
immediately leap into like, I'm going to start a nonprofit and do all that, like, because that's the,
Yeah.
I'm going to make some real change. Like, you don't want to, you're just setting yourself
One
up for
thing at a
burnout.
time. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
one minute you're a happy programmer, the other minute you're waving a flag on top of the plastic island in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah.
Maybe let's go in steps. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just, find something like what I want, or how I describe it is, you want to find something where they're not going to care if you don't show up to volunteer.
Hmm.
Like, obviously, you don't want to ghost them necessarily, but if you didn't show up for whatever reason, they're, like Habitat for Humanity is a good example. It's, if you're there swinging a hammer, building some stuff, they've got other volunteers that'll do the same thing.
Then
You
you
don't want
can
to put yourself in,
graduate. Then you can
yeah,
graduate to better and more involved activities.
or not. I mean, it's
Yeah.
perfectly fine to sit there and go, I'm going to help in this way and keep that scope there. But that can help you feel like you're providing value, because in some cases, the burnout comes from just not feeling like the work you do is meaningful. Like, I'm working on this project and I know it's a dead end. It exists for purely political reasons inside of this company. This is not actually, I'm positing a
Yeah.
scenario.
Of course. Yeah. Of course.
Um, you know, if you're in that situation where you're like, yeah, we're building this thing because it's the VP's pet project and I literally know no one is ever going to use it.
Mhm.
What am I doing with my day? Like, I'm spending a chunk of time on this and it's not going anywhere. So finding something that is valuable and meaningful can help you reconnect with yourself, because a lot of burnout can be a disconnect from your feelings, from your thoughts, from your needs as a person.
One thing I will add is that things that don't work, in my experience, personal experience, is things that work and things that don't work. Things that used to not work for me were maybe trying to find something that will disconnect you, like playing a lot of games or
Mm,
video games, or for some people it's gambling, which is not for me, but some people like it. That doesn't really work because at the end you are more tired and you haven't solved anything. It did take your mind off it for like an hour or two or three or four in some cases. What's worked for me, so I've been doing practicing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for a long time. It's almost 10
mm,
years. And the level, I don't, it's not for everybody, but it's a fun activity. But the point is, it's intense enough as an activity that at least for that hour and a half, you're not, first of all, you physically cannot pick up your phone and look at emails or whatever because someone is actively trying to strangle you. But then it's an hour and a half where you don't really have a mind space for anything else. And that really helps because it forces you to take your mind off whatever your problems are for an hour and a half. They will still be there, but you can, since you had to disconnect forcibly. Otherwise, well, they won't kill you, but it's not going to be pleasant.
yeah.
The When you come back to it, it's, you know what, I was so worried earlier. Now maybe I know I can fix it like this, and that works for me. Like, it's when I have things to think about in my life, which everybody has. After training, that works. The other thing that worked for me is golfing, but maybe it's because we have a very good community golf course here. It's not expensive, so I go there very often. And that's probably about the sun, though. So being outdoors. focus.
Hmm.
I just don't like walking for the sake of walking. So I had to find something that involves walking towards something, which is the ball I just hit
Walk towards a
10,
tiny
10
little ball.
yards.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at least it makes you walk around in the sun. And I feel like that really, really helps.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
probably something that
what's going
will
to help
take your mind off.
what's going to help is varied from person to person. Um, it's going to be a question of what is self care and what is not. So you mentioned the video game thing, and that's actually one of the symptoms of burnout is you find yourself sinking a bunch of time into diversionary tactics. Whether that's TV, whether that's food, whether that's, drugs, alcohol, whatever your particular
It can even
dopamine.
be sports.
It can be. Whatever your particular dopamine generator is of choice, if you find yourself sinking a ton of time into it, and key, like you were saying, you're coming out the other end and you don't feel any better, or you feel worse. Those are signals that that's not the right activity. And you should be seeking something that is better for you, that you come out the other end and, like you said, you feel a little more, you feel, well, again, burnout's a stress management problem. So you're looking for something that is managing that stress. You're looking for something that is helping you process it, distance yourself, and progress. So that is important. Whether that's golfing, whether that is just walking, whether that's taking 5 minutes and going touching in grass, like as the kids say these days, right? Like anything can be that activity if it is self care. But self care is not going to necessarily fix burnout. And that's really important. If you're, especially the farther down you go on that scale, like I have a whole 1 hour talk on this that I describe burnout as a dumpster fire. And like, if you're in the dumpster fire, you can't meditate your way out of the dumpster fire. Like,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
you're in it. At that point, it's going to take time to recover, regardless of if you change your situation, change your circumstances, find something else that is meaningful. You have damaged yourself and you are going to take time to recover.
Mm.
Self-care, on the other hand, can delay burnout. It can help manage stress. It can help push that boundary out, make it go like the path downward take longer, and give you a chance to recognize what's happening and to go, oh, I need to make some changes.
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not like any activity will help you fix the burnout itself, but it probably gives you the perspective to maybe figure out you are in burnout, first of all, and then gives you the perspective to start knowing what to do to fix it,
Mhm.
which is different. Like, I absolutely understand. It's not like going out running for 2 hours every day is going to be a bit better for your health than playing 2 hours of Call of Duty, but it's probably not going to do much other than making you a little bit.
Well, exercise can provably manage your stress, as can, if you allow yourself the time to sit down and play Call of Duty and you're like, I really enjoy Call of Duty and this is fun for me, and I come out the other end feeling great, fantastic. Whatever it is that helps you manage that stress, because that can actually help stop burnout at those early stages. It's just when you get to you start sliding down that spiral, that's when you're just delaying the inevitable at that point. Making it sound bad. Obviously, self care is good for you, and finding those activities that are helpful can help you long term. It's just not. We talk about like burnout, like you're going to go on a vacation and it'll be fine. No.
No, especially if you go on the vacation and you still have responsibilities with
Right, you're still
work, and
checking
then
Slack.
it's even worse at that point because we've all done it. Like we've all gone on a weekend where our friends or partners wanted to really go to this thing, whether it was a convention, it was a sports event, whatever, and you sort of are interested, but maybe you're not 100% invested because if it's something that you really like, you will do the thing, right? If you take me to an MMA event, I will be super happy. If I take my wife, she's probably going to be checking Slack all weekend. She does jiu-jitsu too, but she's not a super fan of the whole thing. I've been in fighting sports for all my life, so I really like it as a pastime. She doesn't. Same thing goes in the reverse. If you go, I'm less of a golfer than she is. So but yeah, I can see that.
Hmm.
I can see that happening. So it has to be so you will end up more stressed because what I feel like that makes me very tired is not focusing on something.
Hmm.
like if you go, I've done, everybody has done things like you were watching a movie, but you also were helping colleagues with something at work, etc. And
Mm.
at the end, you haven't accomplished anything, and you feel like you've been hit by a truck because you spent 2 hours watching, you're trying to watch the movie, you're still clicking around, and at the end, you haven't accomplished neither. You don't know who the murderer was in the movie, you know?
But you didn't solve the problem either. Yeah,
It's so yeah, not doing many things at the time compounds the problem. Sure.
absolutely.
Well, I think it's a very good idea of just going out and doing some open source work. There's plenty of communities that don't just need coders. You can do website work. You can even provide a logo if you're a designer. And
Oh yeah.
there's plenty of very good open source projects with tragically horrible logos. They're just terrible. So go help them. Be tactful about it, but not too much because some of them are really honestly terrible. So you can help them with that, and it's a good way to be involved for anybody. Go to a conference maybe. I don't know if there's well, ClueCon's coming up this summer in Chicago. There's other interesting conferences. There's
ACDC's coming up.
Posdem. Oh yeah, Posdem, which I really like very much in Europe. You should come if you have never gone there. It's very grassroots. It's just 15,000 hackers descending on
Oh wow.
an unsuspecting university town, and just it's 3 days of madness. But it's very fun. A lot of people just come to Brussels without having booked a hotel. Just
Okay.
figure it out on the go. That's the kind of conference. But it's part of the fun. Like we've had 10 people in a room more than
That's actually
once.
just in Belgium, actually.
Yeah.
Was hanging out in Antwerp for a
Well,
conference.
Well, come visit Brussels in next February. That's Potsdam, or come visit Chicago in August or ClueCon.
Fingers
Well,
crossed.
Arthur, thank you so much. It was a great chat. I think it's the topic that we don't touch on enough. We'll think we're super people with superpowers solving super complicated problems, but at the end, we need to take care of ourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So Arthur Doler, Senior Software Engineer at Aviture, joined us today to talk about burnout, how to manage it, how to recognize it. And let's take some advice from him and maybe go outside and take a walk. And well, for the rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.